We've reached 1991, and so we're in the year that Terminator 2 came out. And right, get this, right? Spoilers and all, but Arnie, the bad guy from the first film, isn't a bad Terminator this time. Wow, eh? Crikey, better go and watch that now, hadn't you? I'm sure you'd never seen it before. It's really good. No one watched it at the time. Bryan Adams and his single Everything I Do It For You, from the movie Robin Hood with Kevin Costner's flappy mullet and all that, decided to attach itself to the top of the music charts for like 15 weeks or something. Like, that's probably like the gestation period of a limpet. It's weird how popular it was at the time, because now I think it gets about as much playtime as that sandwich toaster in the back of your cupboard there. But by far the most crucial bit of news from the year is that 1991 was the year that Tim Berners-Lee introduced the World Wide Web to us. Fantastic! Without it, we wouldn't have all these middle-aged men like me talking about old video games on YouTube. You wouldn't be able to buy cushions on Amazon in the shape of pig trotters, and of course that time-honoured tradition of swearing at each other on social media because of our varying and many and different political allegiances. I don't know about you, but I think we should go back to calling it the information superhighway, because that sounds all 90s and cool, doesn't it? In the world of video games, the Super Famicom got its unpopular redesign for American audiences when it was released there as the Super Nintendo. Why make the buttons look like Parma violets? Everyone knows they're the worst sweets that have ever been created. They taste like soap, Nintendo. They taste like bloody soap. Sega started their quest to turn the Megadrive into some sort of stacked giant by putting up the first add-on, the Mega CD. By the end of its many items attached to it transformation, it would end up being taller than a parakeet or a baby chihuahua. And surely the fully complete gestation of the Mega Drive would see it being the tallest console of all time. So other than height, it wasn't as big a year for hardware as previous years, but it was a bloody good year for the established machines, finding their feet with some brilliant titles. And so here is my list of my absolutely most favouriteest games of 1991. My opinions, as we are beginning to discover, are terrible. I have dubious taste indeed, so don't get too offended by anything you may consider too highly ranked or omitted completely. One bone of contention I can see emerging is that Sonic is just in my honourable mentions and not the top 10 itself, because I just don't take to it. It's a massive technical achievement, and I understand why it's so loved, and I do get that it added some a new dimension to platforming with its intense speed, but I don't like Sonic games. As you can see, it's not like I'm a Nintendo fanboy. My last video was nearly all Mega Drive games, so yeah, just don't like Sonic. Sorry! So the rules are as ever. If it came out in 1991, then it's open for consideration. If a sufficiently different variant of the same game came out later, such as GG Shinobi here, then it counts. But with that, let's do a little Ramones impression and go, hey ho, let's go. "1991 was certainly the last hurrah of the scrolling beat-em-up as the most popular genre in arcades, which of course was set back when Double Dragon came out in the late 80s. Within a year, a certain other game on this list's popularity would see move from punching multiple people in the face to just one. So it was good all round for pacifists like me. A happy compromise, if you will. Konami were the masters of the licensed scrolling beat-em-up, with Simpsons, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman and Asterix all getting great beat-em-ups from the formerly great software house. Vendetta wasn't a license and had to stand on its own 2 feet, and it did more than okay. While it was never as popular or as bold as a Final Fight, it was reasonably popular. It was a title I saw in most arcades that I frequented during my youth. For a more comprehensive, in-depth look at Vendetta, its homages to figures from popular culture in its roster, and its bizarre quirks and differences between its various versions, please take a look at my separate video I made about a year ago. Or don't. You might be too busy. Just know it was a fantastic, underrated brawler, and it's a shame that it never left the arcade for a conversion to any of the home formats. Most puzzle games would usually involve you manipulating blocks, bubbles, pipes or some sort of other inanimate object about until you solved your little conundrum. Lemmings didn't. You had to save these charmingly little, relentless, single-minded critters to safety by guiding them to each exit with minimal collateral losses. DMA Design's Mike Daly developed the idea of creating a puzzle game after titting about with deluxe paint. Never let anyone tell you that your procrastination will equal nothing. I mean, it probably won't. You probably won't develop a puzzle game like Lemmings, but you never know. Back on paint then, off you go. Obstacles are avoided and scaled by utilising individual lemmings to do various tasks. By using a combination of these different tasks and precision timing, the player can triumph over a series of increasingly more complex and fiendish puzzle layouts. Ported to most formats of the time, and since in fact, Lemmings has shifted 20 million copies over its lifespan. It is an excellent puzzle game, and you should try it if you're not one of those 20 million people. Who would have thought suicidal rodents would be so entertaining? Oh, well, I didn't anyway. You might have. Sorry. Before Electronic Arts made games that siphoned cash directly from the fan bases of its yearly franchise updates, they put little useless yellow plastic bits on Megadrive cartridges. They also made risky, fun little games like this and Poltergeist. Edgy 90s attitude dripped from the box like oil of oolay from a teenage boy's sock. There's an image, I'm sorry about it. I will be placing an amnesty on wank sock mentions for the rest of the video. A splendidly swift motorcycling racing game laced with fist to helmet violence. You can't keep ahead of that guy. Is he irritating you? Well, just punch him in the face or kick him into incoming traffic. It'll be fine. No one will judge you. Road Rash is a memorable title that gets a tribute game on Kickstarter every once in a while because it is so well loved. But there's been no continuation from Electronic Arts after the 32-bit entries in the series would prove to be mostly complete arse. Hopefully one day we'll get an official sequel to Road Rash, as it really is one of the best games on the Mega Drive. Mega Drive owners must have felt that Capcom have farted directly into their mouth holes as they looked enviously as the Super Nintendo got Final Fight within its first few months of existing. Luckily for Mega Drive owners, Final Fight on the Super Nintendo was a rushed botch, and Sega were like, well, that's not on, is it? Let's make our own version of Final Fight. And the game they made had a fantastic 2-player mode. That's 2 players, Super NES version of Final Fight. And it has 3 selectable characters. That's 3 selectable characters, Super NES version of Final Fight. And it's also a title that is, I think, better remembered than Final Fight, in all honesty. It really is dripping in quality. Streets of Rage has a pumping EDM soundtrack that's never been bettered by Yuzo Koshiro. It's got a tough but fair difficulty, and it's got this level where you can throw people off of a lift, and I really like this bit for some reason. It's the bit I always want to play. Streets of Rage ended up being everything that Super NES Final Fight wasn't. And not only that, but an arcade bettering version of Final Fight eventually appeared on the Mega Drive anyway, via the Mega CD. Man, it wasn't Capcom farting in the mouths of Mega Drive owners. They were taking a full-on dump down the throats of Super Nintendo owners. The beasts. But pull that turd from your jaw, Super Nintendo owners, because at least there was one god-tier scrolling beat-em-up in the early days of the Super Nintendo, though you would have to wait to the following year to get it. Not only that, though, it was based on those youthful deformed martial arts terrapins, and the arcade version was a peak of what would be coming for the Super Nintendo in 1992. So hold your horses, don't trade in your Super Nintendo just yet. A sequel to the original coin-up, Turtles in Time would bring with it that unmistakable Konami arcade joyful sparkle. Not so much a new title as a continuation, but with the reptiles travelling across chronology itself in order to thwart the Foot Clan, including a range of characters from the Secret of the Ooze movie, such as Tokor, Razar, and Super Shredder, of course played by wrestler Kevin Nash. So go Ninja, go Ninja, go! Go Ninja, go Ninja, go! But don't look at the Mega Drive title, Hyperstone Heist, because it'll take away your feeling of superiority again, because it's the same game really. It's slightly better on the Super Nintendo though, so... Otherwise known as Final Fantasy II, upon its initial release, Final Fantasy IV, wow, this is going to get confusing, was the first Final Fantasy game I ever played, and what an eye-opener that was. A huge, sprawling storyline with a defined crew of player characters with cool classes and distinct personalities. It's a game that follows the redemptive story of Cecil the Dark Knight as he attempts to prevent a sorcerer from seizing a collection of crystals that could destroy the world. Sounds a bit average, doesn't it? And it looks a bit average, in fairness, but it is a brilliant tale. It sort of introduced hardcore nerds to the world of Final Fantasy a good 6 years before Final Fantasy VII would get all the other nerds. And it's actually the game that managed to convince me that Aerith in Final Fantasy VII, or Eris if you prefer, that she would be okay right up until the end of the game, because everyone in Final Fantasy II dies or comes back during the game. So my grief for Aerith or Eris was actually felt a lot later than most other people, like during the end credits, because Final Fantasy II basically convinced me that people don't die in Final Fantasy games. So thanks Sid, you Jurgen Klopp looking buffoon. You ruined my experience. Another RPG, of course, more of an action adventure really, is Legend of Zelda. I was never too big a fan of the NES original of Zelda or its sequel, but I was always aboard the Super Nintendo game. It's a brilliant, inventive title with a fantastically designed world. The addition of an alternate dimension adds a new dimension to the gameplay, and it comes as a bit of a surprise. It's a fair chunk through the game, and it's one of those wow moments that were all too common in the early days of the Super Nintendo. Another one is that bit in Contra where the plane comes down. Ooh. Link's quest to rescue Zelda and turn the Dark World back to the Sacred Realm is traditional Zelda at its very best, with switches between the two worlds giving us some ingenious puzzles on top of that already clever Zelda dungeon brain teaser format. I really love this game. It's one of those games that really is a flagship title for the Super Nintendo, and it's one that I think everyone should play at some point. Most of the games on this list and the last one should be encouraging you to get a Super Nintendo Classic as well as a Mega Drive Classic when that comes out. The thing that struck me most about Castlevania 4 was that Simon Belmont looked nothing like he did in Captain N, the Games Master. The second thing was this silly floppy whip. Wibbly bobbly wibbly, look at this silly whip. Castlevania's first entry into the 16-bit era was initially a bit disappointing to play. It looked okay, it played okay, but beyond the consistently gorgeous music, there was not a lot to like about the game. It was meh from the very first level up until you got into the main castle proper. And then the boys at Konami sort of woke up and went, oh, we've got this shiny new spangly Nintendo under the telly. Shall we actually make a 16-bit game that takes advantage of the powerhouse? And so then they went, yep, and they set to work on an absolute beauty of a title in both looks and gameplay. As good a refinement of the traditional Castlevania game as Super Mario World was to those early NES Mario efforts. It's great, I love it. It's one of the very best games on the Super Nintendo, and you should play it like yesterday. The subject of a video very early on in my YouTube, I'm not going to call it a career, because I've only got about 50 subscribers, but one of my very favourite games. Wrestle Fest is what WWF fans wanted from a wrestling game. A silly, colourful, joyful clash of ridiculous characters was exactly what wrestling was about at the time, and Tecmo's nailed it. Instead, at home, we got dull, boring trash like Super Wrestlemania by LJN on the home formats, and God, that game is boring. WrestleFest couldn't be more different. It is a daft, supersized, empty-calorie meal version of Tecmo's earlier WWF Superstars, and it is glorious. It became a remote island of silly WWF quality all the way through until the late 90s, early 2000s, when SmackDown and No Mercy entered the world. That Royal Rumble mode on WrestleFest is absolutely the perfectly distilled arcade experience. I don't think it's possible to have more fun in an arcade than to play that mode. So never mind if you don't like wrestling games, you need to give this a go on MAME or something like that, because it is fantastic. You don't need to be a Hulkamaniac, because it's just absolutely ridiculous nonsense, and I love it. Street Fighter 2 essentially came from nowhere, but it came along and promptly changed the arcade landscape in mere weeks. The sequel to a bang average fighting game in Street Fighter 1, Street Fighter 2's cast of legendary characters, fantastic presentation, and most of all, its innovative and incredible combo system, with some of it being a happy accident, according to game lead designer Akira Nishitiani. Street Fighter 2 forced every other maker of video games on all formats, from the arcades to the home consoles, to drop all of their plans and go into a meeting and talk about making a title that could compete with Capcom's Coin Guzzler. Its influence was meteoric, with one-on-one fighters still pouring out of games' wombs all around software houses today, with professional gamers competing in tournaments like EVO. Street Fighter 2 was as revolutionary for arcades as anything you can mention, from Pong to Pac-Man to Space Invaders to Donkey Kong. It's in that tier of titles. Absolutely crucial, absolutely one of the best games ever made. It is the ground zero of a phenomenon that would never be repeated in arcades ever again. Indeed, it might have been the last big games release that changed everything, up until we got things like Doom and Super Mario 64, and then I don't know what really you could say since has been as influential. Maybe Grand Theft Auto 3, yes. But there we go. Yeah, I like Street Fighter 2. It's alright, innit? I guess you could say I prefer it to Sonic the Hedgehog, clearly. I'm sorry, Sonic and your fans. You know, you got a movie coming out, that'd be good. My son is threatening to make me go and watch it. So I guess you're getting your own back. I'm not going to look forward to that day. Anyway, there we go. That's the list wrapped up again. On to 1992, when I can be bothered. Yay! Okay, thanks, bye.